It is day 2 of the 31st Nigerian Economic Summit, with discussions around Nigeria's evolving fiscal landscape with a spotlight on tax and policy reform. Now, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax and Fiscal Policy Reform, Taiwo Oyedele, delivered an address offering insights into the direction and goals of the reform agenda. Now, Oyedele outlined how the proposed changes aim to simplify Nigeria's tax system and also enhance revenue efficiency and reduce the burden on compliant businesses, as well as relieve pressure on lower income earners. Now, to further this discussion, we want to take a deeper dive, and to do that, we have the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and the current emir of Kano, and that is Muhammadu Sanusi II. Your Highness, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you for coming on to the news this evening. You are no stranger when it comes to Nigeria's economic policy, and you have operated at the topmost level yourself. What specific tax and policy reforms would you propose for Nigeria to address in its evolving fiscal policy?
Thank you very much. Well, look, at the moment, as far as monetary policy is concerned, I have nothing but positive words for what the central bank has done. We come in from a background of very high levels of instability as a result of loose money and uncontrolled growth in money supply. And the central bank has taken the last 1 year to mop up all that money. Interest rates are high, yes, but we have stabilized the exchange rate. We have pulled back from the brink of total economic collapse. Inflation is coming down. It's still at 20%, still very high, but it's coming down from the very high levels of a few years ago. We have built up reserves to over $40 billion. The economy has grown first quarter by more than 3%, second quarter by more than 4%. And this is the first time in a long time that this economy has been growing faster than the population. For many years, population growth has exceeded GDP growth. And this in a time when oil price has been moderate. So in terms of monetary policy and stability, I have nothing but commendation for the government. On the fiscal side, we have had an improvement in revenue to GDP ratios, an improvement in debt service ratios, a contraction in the deficit, and these are positive steps. But we still have a long way to go. I mean, I would like to see a better look at fiscal expenditure. We're still spending too much money on government, on the cost of governance, too many political appointees, too many officers. We still have to look at the quality of spending, the value for money, the processes for spending, because and the reason is that if we do not improve the quality of spending and put a rein on spending, we're going to continue borrowing. So after saving money from these expensive subsidies, after building up the government balance sheet, you go and spend it, and then you have to borrow again. So we still have some steps to go on the fiscal side, but the first thing was to fix revenue, and I think with the tax reforms and with what we've seen so far, the fiscal side is on its way. Structural reforms take longer. We talk about the power sector. I would like to see that we put a stop to the mass importation of food. I know it was driven by a desire to bring down food prices, but it is in the end very counterproductive to domestic production and domestic producer prices. So hopefully we will get to a point where we go back on track with the reforms in the agricultural sector, fixing that cultural value chain and relying on domestic production to feed the nation. But all in all, I think I would say 70 to 80% of what the government has done and the direction it is on, I support. I do have some reservations about one or two things like the importation of food and the quality of expenditure and the nature of overheads. But I think we're on the right path, and we've got to keep working to get to the destination. But we're coming from a bad place, and we've come very far in the right direction.
Now, there have been talks about diversification of our economy, and you've also preferred solutions whilst you were at the topmost level and even afterwards, when giving public speeches. And you're saying that we're on the right trajectory when it comes to our fiscal policies and direction for our economy. But to diversify Nigeria away from oil, what exactly does the country stand to tackle in doing that? Would it be insecurity? Would it be, boosting confidence, investor confidence? What would it be to make Nigeria diversify properly or in depth?
But Nigeria has been away from oil for a long time. I mean, it's a myth. Oil is less than 10% of GDP, maybe less than 5% today. Nigeria is not an oil-dependent country. Government revenues are driven by oil prices. And we've got to diversify our exports, and I think we're now having non-oil exports increase because of the exchange rate situation, and we're getting more competitive. We've got to work on the quality of exports and access to markets. If we want to sell Nigerian goods abroad, we've got to make sure they meet the specifications of the consumer, and that requires regulation, it requires controls, it requires certification, and that work needs to be done. But in terms of the GDP, services, financial services, telecommunication services, information technology, education and healthcare, those sectors have grown significantly in the last few decades. So there has been significant diversification of production away from oil. And what we need to do is diversify sources of government revenue and reduce the correlation between oil and non-oil revenue, because we often forget that when oil revenue goes up, we also tend to import more, and we have import duties, and therefore when oil prices go down, you have a reverse. So reduce that correlation, have more sources with diversifying the tax base, with widening the tax net, with relying more on domestic income and production, you reduce those vulnerabilities.
Now, as we're talking about reducing vulnerabilities, now we've seen the shock effect of the removal of petrol subsidy up until today. And many of us or Nigerians are still very skeptical or unsure whether or not that decision was made too hastily or all at once. In your fair assessment of the implications of removing the fuel subsidy, would you say that, that Nigeria has done, or the government have done so far so well, so good when it comes to mitigating the impact on the vulnerable population of Nigeria?
You know, there's a kind of poetic justice here. When I was governor of Central Bank in 2011, we advised the president to remove fuel subsidies. Subsidies were removed, and some people went on demonstration, Occupy Nigeria, opposed it, and now they're in government and they've had to do it because that is the reality. Those subsidies needed to go. What the president did was absolutely necessary. And my experience with these things is, if you say you're going to remove subsidies gradually in this country, the vested interests and those who have profited from subsidy would make it difficult for you to complete it. Even with the President Jonathan, when we started, the negotiations were with Labour, where we would remove 50% of the subsidies and then remove the rest later. But once we took that first step, that was the end. So the decision to remove the subsidy, yes, it was shocking, and it was a shock treatment, shock therapy. It would have disruptive effects. But if it had not been done when it was done, I don't think it would have been done at all. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have always known that if you remove the subsidies, you're going to have inflation, you're going to have an impact on the poor and vulnerable. But what was the alternative? You had reached a point where we had finished using our revenues. We were now borrowing to pay subsidy. We had gotten to a point, if you remember, in 2023, where 100% of government revenue was going to service debt. The country was bankrupt. Where were we going to pay the subsidy from? We were on the brink of economic collapse. The Naira was on a free fall. So the idea of liberalizing the Naira, tightening money, removing the subsidy to stabilize the economy pulled us back from the brink. Think of Venezuela under Chavez. Think of Zimbabwe under Mugabe. Think of Uganda under Idi Amin. This is where we were headed if we had not pulled back from the brink. So there is a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering. But what I say is that the pain and suffering would have been much, much worse if we had continued, because ultimately those subsidies would have to go. If we had done this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this pain would not have been what it was. When I was saying we should do it in 2011, 2012, if it had been done at that time, we would not have gone through this. Right. We continued for another 13 years, okay? And I don't think we could have continued for 2 or 3 more years.
Your Royal Highness, you said that Nigeria is not an oil-dependent economy, but most of its government revenue and foreign exchanges still come from crude oil exports, even though oil contributes only a small share to its overall GDP. And to that effect, and to that, while we're bearing that at the back of mind, we saw that the display or the turn of events that happened over the week, Dangote Refinery and Pegasan. with the dispute of employment or the retirement or the entrenchment of about 800 plus employees from Dangote Refinery and the action strike that Pegasan had to take. What's your position on a turn of events that happened all through last week, and now we've seen the cues regarding the price of gas, cooking gas at the filling stations?
Okay, so I'm one of a number of Nigerians who just issued a statement on this matter. First of all, let me say that what's happening with Dangote is very sad because it sends the wrong signals to investors, local and international. The Dangote refinery is a strategic national investment. To have a Nigerian invest over $20 billion in this economy, to have any individual invest $20 billion in this economy is, at this time when people have seen Nigeria as bad news, is something that we should all comment and something we should gather around. Secondly, if you look at the problems of the Nigerian economy on the fiscus before the refinery came on stream, the bulk of those problems had to do with the petroleum sector. Our refineries were not working. We're an oil-producing country that was importing petroleum products. In addition to importing petroleum products and draining our foreign exchange, we had huge corruption and huge scams in the subsidy regime. I lost my job in the central bank because I was pointing out these leakages. Now, the refinery disrupts a business model for rent seekers, and that is why it will face opposition. It is not about rights. It is not about the economy. It's about people who see the model they've had for 30, 40 years suddenly disappearing. People have made billions of money from this business, claiming they imported petrol that they never imported, claiming money from NNPC as subsidy, and in an opaque manner, in a manner that has not been audited, in a manner where nobody sees. Now that model is disappearing. We're now going to be a net exporter of petroleum products. We're going to produce our petroleum products locally. We're not importing. We are going to save our foreign exchange and actually add to the foreign exchange through our exports. Now, no patriotic Nigerian should get in the way of that refinery. I don't know the details of the conflict between him and the unions. What I know is that joining a union is a voluntary thing. If a driver wants to join a union, then he should go and work for a company that allows its drivers to join unions. If a driver chooses not to be part of a union and work for Dangote, he should go and work for Dangote. I don't think anyone should stop a private company. If you have a private school and you say these are your fees, if people cannot pay those fees, they go to a school where they've got lower fees. You can't tell people that who have invested privately that they should subject their business to the whims and caprices of a union. I think it is wrong. I think it is unfair. And I think to threaten the entire country with a strike over a matter between a union and a private company is the most irresponsible thing I've seen as far as the economy is concerned. I would urge Dangote to make sure that whatever he does is lawful, that all rights of members of his staff are respected, their constitutional rights are not violated. But I completely align with the position of the Vice President and the federal government that we cannot allow this investment to be at risk and we cannot allow this refinery to be shut down. We need it as a country. We need to protect it.
Right. As we're talking about the economy of the nation, one has to ask about your position on the view that that Nigeria's economy is taking a turn for the better as a result of President Bola Tinubu's policies. And one would say it's Tinubunomics. We also have seen Director General of the World Trade Organization, and that's former Nigeria's Finance Minister Ukonjo-Iweala, testifying to these turnaround of these policies. What's your view on that? Would you agree that we're on a path to prosperity?
Look, I think any honest economist will understand that this is correct. First of all, they've done in large part what we have been calling for in the last 10 years, okay? Making sure that we have a stable exchange rate, making sure that we get inflation under control, making sure that we rebuild our reserves and buffers in the event of a global shock, okay? Providing the stability that is a foundation for investments. I am not saying that we are already at our destination. There's still a long way to go. And I've said that there's still some things that have not been done. There's some things that are probably being done wrongly or that could be done better. But in terms of the big questions and the big issues, I think he's taken the economy by the scruff of the neck. Removing the subsidy and liberalizing the exchange rates was extremely timely, and the central bank has been able to catch up and bring the economy back. Now, the numbers are there. The GDP growth in the first quarter was 3.13%, I think. In the second quarter, it was over 4%. And as I said earlier, this is the first time in a long time that population growth has fallen behind GDP growth, which means we can expect to see some improvement in per capita GDP. Now, 4% growth is not going to take us where we want to go. We need to aim for double-digit growth. We need to go for 10%, 11%, 12% year on year for us to really deal with poverty. But at least we have turned the corner. Now we've got to think of all the structural bottlenecks that we have and how you unlock them. Infrastructure, electricity, technology, the productivity of our agriculture, education, especially in these days of artificial intelligence, and good healthcare. If we can do those things, I think, and I'm not talking about Tinubu or this government. I'm not a politician. You know me. I'm just saying things as they are.
Your Royal Highness, I must say thank you for taking out the time to join us this evening. But before I let you go, I do have to ask about, these policies and how they can translate very quickly, because at the core of it is the common man, which is a Nigerian on the streets, and the informal sector still struggling to see those effects. When will they happen anytime soon, at least just for layman terms, as our viewers are watching from home? No,
I mean, every economic crisis comes with hardship. And there's a viral video that went round of me, I think in 2011, 2012, when I was talking about subsidy. And I did say that when we have a crisis, we're going to suffer. This is exactly what we're trying to avoid. We are paying the price for many years of mismanagement. And of course, not just mismanagement. You remember we had COVID, we've had banditry, we've had insecurity, and you add to that bad economic management. So there will be pain, and the government needs to do whatever it can to alleviate that pain, provide the palliatives, deal with the cost of food, deal with healthcare, deal with education. And this is the responsibility of government at the federal level, at the state level, at the local government level. I don't think there is anyone that would deny that. But the reality is, if we had not had these policies, we would have been in a much worse situation. I mean, you could continue, rubbing a balm. It's like you're ill, and you keep taking Panadol, but you don't treat the underlying sickness. So we could have continued printing money, paying salaries, going on as if it was business as usual, borrowing and spending, until you get to a point where you go bankrupt, where your lenders are no longer lending to you, and then where you lose control of the economy. I think what they have done is to stop us from going over the abyss. And that is, for me, what I commend them for. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not one of those who says, everything the government has done is perfect. No, I think there are things where there are areas of improvement, and I think there are cultures that we need to change around spending, around transparency, that are legacy issues that have continued that we have to address, because reform has to go, not just, it can't be just financial. You've got to have an ethical revolution. You've got to have a cleanup. You've got to have good governance. Institutions have to have credibility. Right. The individuals who are in leadership have to have credibility. And these are all part of the reforms. And we'll continue to speak, to say what we think is right and what we think needs to be improved. It is up to them to listen. Your Royal Highness, I must say thank you for taking out the time to join us. We're going to let you go at this time.